Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to season 2 of Specialness. Today we're going to be talking about grief and how you handle grief in a marriage when you're in a situation that we're in. But first, before we'd give everybody an update on what's going on with Cason.
Well, first, you're Jeff,
Oh, right, I'm Jeff.
and I'm Kim.
Yes.
But yes, so we were going to give a little update on Cason, because, just a little one. So in the last 8 weeks, I wrote this down so we would
She's
get it.
on her peepers.
Putting on my peeps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the last 8 weeks, he has seen 5 doctors, had 4 blood tests, 2 EKGs, 4 shots, 8 infusions. He will have a stress test and see 2 more doctors and add another doctor, a pulmonologist, to the team all in the next couple weeks. And right now, they are concerned that he has exercise-induced hypertension.
EIH.
Yes. And so Cason's had 2 other stress tests. The first one showed that he had that. The second one was inconclusive. And because he still has chest pain when he's exercising, doing any of his Special Olympics things, they are wanting to do another stress test to see. Now, here comes the complication.
Oh, now we're going to talk about the complication?
Yes.
Okay.
So we saw the cardiologist last week, and she said if this stress test comes back that, yes, he has exercise-induced hypertension, they want to put him on a heart medication. The bad news is that medication affects his lithium and can cause lithium toxicity. And as we've talked before, that's happened to Cason.
One time.
And this heart medicine affects his kidneys, which he's on borderline because of the lithium. So it's kind of putting us in a tough situation of having to kind of figure this out because he's 23. And if we don't treat this hypertension,
right,
got
to keep track of what we're treating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then it can cause issues with his heart, especially down the line a little bit. It affects his blood vessels. But then what do we do with the lithium? And as we've said multiple times, he needs the lithium. So it just puts us in a hard situation where I think we're going to have to, if this comes out, that this is what it is.
Which I'm pretty sure it will be.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things where we're going to have to sit down with the psychiatrist and the cardiologist and kind of figure out what's best for Cason. And it's, as a parent, we've talked about this before, it's hard to make those decisions because he's only 23, But I wanted to give this update, or we wanted to give this update, because this is a perfect example of when we think things are kind of smooth sailing with Cason, that he seems to be doing well. Something always seems to come up.
And I think we can say that other than those things that have happened in the first 10 weeks of the year, he is doing pretty good.
Right.
Other than those 16 things and the potential life-threatening condition.
And we're having to see the pulmonologist add this to the mix because they're trying to figure out the heart, lung, how they work together, and how, is there something going on with the lungs that we don't know? He already has the asthma and stuff. But anyways, that's the quick update on Cason. Fill you in later.
We'll keep you posted.
But that's the life of a special needs mom for sure. I mean, this is why I can't have a job.
This is the life of this special needs mom.
This special needs mom. Doctors, more doctors, appointments, tests, drugs, all kinds of stuff. So that's the update.
Yeah.
So
now we can move on to lighter topics.
Right.
Now that we've covered the new things we're dealing with at the ripe old age of 23, we, last week we started talking about the challenges of being in a marriage when you are in a special needs family. And we said we were going to talk about this for a few weeks. There's a few topics. And this week we want to talk about grief. Grief has been a big part of our lives. And exactly as to why, I'm sure a lot of people who watch this will be able to relate to. But before we really get into the topic, I think there's a poem that we found a few years ago that we feel is really, really kind of hits the nail on the head for what it's like to be a special needs parent.
Right.
So Kim will now give a dramatic reading
Yes.
of a poem.
Okay.
The author, what's
her name is Emily Perl? I can't say Kingsley. So Emily Kingsley.
Emily Kingsley.
Okay, so this poem is called Welcome to Holland. I am often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability, to try to help people who have not shared that unique experience to understand it, to imagine how it would feel. It's like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks, make your wonderful plans, the Colosseum, the Michelangelo David, the gondolas in Venice. You may learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's all very exciting. After months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plane lands and the stewardess comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." Holland, you say? What do you mean, Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life, I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plan. They've landed in Holland. And there you must stay. The important thing is that they haven't taken you to a horrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence, famine, and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out and buy new guidebooks, and you must learn a whole new language, and you will meet a whole new group of people you would never have met. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy, less splashy than Italy, but after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath, you look around, and you begin to notice that Holland has windmills, and Holland has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of that will never, ever, ever go away, because the loss of that dream is a very, very significant loss. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things about Holland.
Now, of course, she was a special needs mother.
Yes.
And I believe that poem was written in 1987.
87.
So it's,
So it's been a while.
It's been around a while.
Yeah.
If I were to give some constructive notes to Ms. Kingsley.
Yes.
The only thing that I would say is that I don't know if this is like a vacation. I think it's more like you're moving. You're not just... Yeah, because we're not visiting Holland.
We're not visiting. We're living.
It's really more about where you're going to move. And,
right.
And let's say you're going to move to New York City, or Miami, some very amazing city full of culture and things to do. And you get on the plane to fly to where you're going to live, and you end up in Poughkeepsie, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing against New Jersey, but
or some cornfield in Nebraska.
Right. The point is that, to me, the only analogy that doesn't work here is that it's not a vacation. It's a permanent residence.
Right.
And I think it sets the stage for what we're going to dig into today, and that's. She makes a very good analogy about when you're going to have a baby, you have all these plans, you have all these expectations, actually, of things that your child is going to do. And there's a natural progression to the events that they'll experience and that you'll be a part of, these guideposts in life. And it starts early with, first steps and first words and graduating kindergarten and all those things. But that's not really what we get to experience, is it?
And like we've said before, no one signs up to be a special needs parent unless you would on purpose adopt a special needs child. And we had talked about several episodes ago that in our marriage, we've had a lot of grief. We've had to grieve the loss of our child. We've had to grieve the loss of not being able to have biological children. And that pain doesn't go away. It's always with us. We don't dwell on it, but it's always there. There's always reminders of how old Jack would be and what Jack would be doing now, because I think I had mentioned before I was pregnant at the same.
I don't know that anyone, have we mentioned Jack by name?
I don't
I
know.
don't think we have. So you might want to introduce.
Jack is our baby.
Jack was
Was
our
our
baby
baby.
who
And,
would be 25.
Yeah, I'd be 25. And I was pregnant at the same time with several friends who were due right about the same time I was. And thankfully, their babies were born healthy and grown up. But we still see them. We see them on social media, that kind of stuff, and they've gone to college and they've graduated and gotten married. Some are about to be married and
Going to graduate school.
Yeah, going to graduate school. And so it's always in the back of our minds, of like, what would Jack be like? What would our lives be like if Jack had lived, kind of thing. And then, like I said, we have the loss of not having biological children. And that's a hole in our hearts that can't be filled. I mean, we love our boys with all of our hearts and souls, and they are meant to be our children, Jackson and Cason. And they are our children, but there is a hole in our hearts of you and I not having a biological child. What would that child look like? What would that child be like? Would that child have your personality or my personality, or look like you when they were little? I mean, so that's always there. And I'm reminded of that constantly, because every doctor's appointment we go to, even if the doctor has known Cason for years and years and years, there's always a new nurse. Somebody's new. And because Cason has striking red hair, and obviously you and I don't, the first question we get, where did he get that red hair? Where did that come from? Who in your family has that?
It's not challenging enough that we have a special needs child who was adopted, so we have limited, knowledge of their past. But on top of that, he looks nothing like us.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, we get that. But then, like you just said, it brings up doctors. Any new doctor wants to know family history. And so it's just constantly in my face that he is not my biological child. And, we talked about a couple of episodes ago about how I went and met with the lady with Social Security with Cason, and her rudeness about, you couldn't have kids and who in your family didn't want him and those kind of things. And so even though, we adopted him 23 years ago, I still get questions about it. Different for you being a guy than it is for me, because guys, I don't know, most men aren't going to go up and ask, where did the red hair come from? I don't know. That seems more like a girl question.
Man, I don't know. I mean, I would say that I wouldn't be surprised if anyone did it. I don't know that it matters. People just, I mean, not necessarily that they should. It's just, I just generally don't think many times people think kids are adopted. They generally,
just assume
assume it's a biological child, and they'll ask questions about it.
Yeah, right. So those are two pretty big situations of grief we've had to deal with, and those, like I said, we don't dwell on them. They're there.
Those were the earliest ones.
The early ones
that have continued.
Yeah. But we've learned to move on and acknowledge those feelings when they come up or whatever, but moved on. But it wasn't until we found out and realized we were going to have a special boy did we really understand that this kind of grief is very different from the two examples I had just talked about.
And certainly from a death. I think you can very distinctly put our parenthood into kind of two distinct periods of time. One was much shorter than the other, but for the first, there was that moment, and we talked about it last season, where we were told when he was about 6 years old that we should just institutionalize him. And that was was a come to Jesus moment right there. I mean, that was if that changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think up to that point, everything we were experiencing, we hadn't had any diagnoses that seemed like everything seemed to be something that he was gonna outgrow.
Right.
That sensory integration disorder and
Right. And
personal issues.
And we, up to that point, we were able to still have the dreams that parents have when they're pregnant or whatever, thinking about what this child is going to be. Up to this point, we kind of were still able to have those dreams.
We just thought they were delayed.
They just thought they were delayed, but we still thought they were going to be there. And we're saying that some parents find out at birth that their child is going to be different. And it's a shock right then and there. Other parents, it's several months. Other parents, it's several years. And so for us, we were kind of in this weird, he cried all the time when he was a baby and stuff. And he had severe colic and separation anxiety and stuff when he was 6 months old. But when he was 6 months old, were not thinking what we come to find out was wrong with it. We were not thinking that. We're like, he's just going to be, it's going to be a hard.
And that goes kind of with what we've talked about before. When a child is born with a disability or with Down syndrome, where they physically look, you can tell there's an issue. That grief starts instantaneously, but also there's a recognition by everybody of what's going on. In our case, it just seemed like we had a really difficult child. He was just a fiery redhead,
mm-hmm.
and he was going to outgrow this at some point. But we couldn't have seen what was coming.
No, and every special needs parent, whenever that reality is, either at the birth, couple years, couple months, whenever that reality sets in that their child's going to be different, and the dreams that you had for that child and for your life, when that happens, it is an extremely life-altering, devastating, sad moment, because at that moment you're instantly grieving everything we just talked about. You're instantly, in an instant, you are grieving everything you had planned for the 9 months you were pregnant, or the 3 years you were waiting to adopt this child, or whatever it is. You had hopes and dreams of what your child's life is going to look like and what your life is going to look like. And when that reality hits, it is devastating.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you it's no different, than what they talk about, the 5 stages of grief. Anyone who's ever taken a psychology class from anywhere from high school to college, when you learn about the 5 stages of grief, they're the same. I think the major difference is, with a death, you go through the 5 stages of grief, and when you get to acceptance, you have moved on. You've been able to accept that a loved one is gone, and the time it takes varies. But in a situation like ours, where every milestone represents a new wound.
Well, we were saying every diagnosis.
Well,
with
both.
Cason.
It's both.
It's both, but that's what makes Cason, I think, in our situation so unique, is that, and I'm not downplaying when I say just autism, just Down syndrome,
sure,
just cerebral palsy, whatever the disability might be. Cason literally it seems like every year for years had a new diagnosis put on him, and that diagnosis changed his prognosis. It changed our life and his. Like you said, we started off with sensory integration, and then it was this, and then it was that. Then we get it's bipolar, he needs to be institutionalized. And that for us was our reality moment of, oh my, our friends, we could look around, and our friends that had kids similar to Cason's age, or his cousins, that he has 2 cousins that are the same age as him, their kids are in kindergarten or first grade, whatever, and they're starting sports or Cub Scouts or whatever, dance or whatever. And we're sitting back and being told we need to institutionalize our child. And it was a huge, oh my gosh. And we were so sad for Cason, but we were really sad for us.
And I'm not sure which we were more sad about. It's I think one of the interesting things about Cason, and we've talked about how, ironically, one of the gifts that we have with him is that he doesn't have the mental ability and acuity to really understand what he's missing out on.
Right.
So it's made it easier for us to be his guardian. It's made it easier for us to provide care for him because he doesn't question anything. So that's a big benefit.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we're sad for him because, gosh, he doesn't even realize the things he's missing out on. And I think overall, it's probably harder. It's clearly harder on us. It's not hard on him. He doesn't know any better. Mm-hmm. But when we hear about, and it starts, like I said, it starts young, and now it's not just about diagnoses. It's about things that all kids do, whether they're girls or boys. The things that they do as a part of life, whether it's graduating kindergarten or having their first kiss or falling in love or getting a driver's license or playing on a sports team, scoring their first goal or basket or whatever it is. I mean, those are things that, well, first of all, that's the bedrock of Facebook.
Exactly. Any social media.
Right. And Facebook kind of started getting big around the time Cason, right about the time that we were told that he needed to go into an institution, about 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have spent the next 17 years watching kids his age, it didn't really matter if they were older or younger. We have seen the updates. We've seen how they're doing and what they're going through and their accomplishments. And it's just a constant reminder of the things that we won't get to experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason you never quite get through the stages of grief is because it keeps restarting.
Mm-hmm.
You just when you think you accept that, okay, I'm not going to get to see Cason,
get his driver's license.
Get his driver's license. I'm going to get over that. Well, then they're graduating from high school.
Right. Because we were saying the early on milestones, they were hard, but they weren't as hard for some reason. It was as he got older that those milestones really
they
got heavier.
Yeah.
And, like we said, becoming a teenager, the driver's license was the first, for me, a first big one that, all of our friends, they're like, look, so-and-so got their permit. No, it's so fun. And I'm like, Cason's still wetting the bed at 16.
Yeah.
And and I say this all the time, but at 16, I was doing the exact same thing for him that I was doing 10 years prior to that. He hasn't moved on. And
more or less what you're doing 6 years later.
Right. And then everyone's graduating high school, and then they go to college, and then we're at the stage where they've all graduated college now, and they have their first job, and several of them are
they're engaged. They're getting married, or they're going to graduate school.
Yeah. And I say, wow, I just took Cason to 5 doctor's appointments, and he's having to have 3 stress tests and EKGs, and
he's complaining about how much his arm hurts because of all the shots he got and how he can't bend his arm, and
right. And we're still tying his shoes in the morning, and it's just a realization. I mean, it's a constant realization of how different our life is. And for me, every single time a milestone approaches, or I know it's going to approach, I think to myself, I've got it this time.
Yeah, I'm prepared.
I'm prepared.
I've been through this before. I'm prepared to deal with it.
Right. I know it's coming. I know it's graduation season's coming up. But at this point, there's a couple people graduating that were in his class like preschool class and stuff like that. I know that, but wedding season's coming up, and people we know that were his age are now getting married. And so I'm like already preparing myself. I'm like, okay, so this is going to happen and this is going to happen, and I'm not going to react. I'm not going to feel those emotions. But every single time I'm hit with the same emotion, no matter what I do to prepare for it or think I'm okay, it still hits. And it has nothing to do with the person that is graduating or getting married or getting engaged. We're happy for them. And we're happy for our friends that their kids are successful and happy. Has nothing to do with that. It's this sadness that we have.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It certainly seems that for civilians, these are things that they take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I don't mean that in a bad way, but when you're not in a situation where you have a special child, you know, these things are going to happen. The bumps in the road, the good things, they're going to happen. And I don't, I mean, I'd be interested to get a perspective of somebody if, you know, did they look forward to those things, or did they just know they were coming and they experienced them when they had them? Because I can certainly say that when you now realize those things are off the table and that they're not going to happen, it's a lot tougher to reconcile that than wondering when it's going to happen.
Right.
You know, when you just know that those things, you're in Holland.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
It's definitely the parallel there that is unmistakable.
Yeah. And for me, I would say the two hardest milestones up to this point was graduating high school. And Cason graduated high school, like we've said.
And of course, he graduated in 2020 during COVID. So it was
very different.
It was already weird.
Yeah.
It was already far different. And then, of course, it was
COVID.
Yeah.
And then when his peers and cousins get engaged, those two were the biggest for me. Again, I'm happy for everybody, but to me, the high school one was really, really hard because as a parent, what are you told your whole parenting journey? When they're 18, they're going to start to leave the nest, right? You've prepared them. And when you have a kid, you know, like Jackson, you know, when they talk about all through high school, all they talk about is they're going to, you know, leave your house and you've prepared them along the way and things like that. But for Cason and for special needs parents, they're not leaving the house. You're continuing to caregive. You're not, that's just not there. And so that's why that one was so hard for me, partly because it was during COVID and he was going to be home with me and you every single day and not going to have a break. And at that point we needed a break. We were so tired, still are, but he now obviously goes to day program. And so we do get a rest, but during that time we didn't. And it was just 24/7 all the time, and not in realizing he's not going to get to go away to college, and we're not going to go visit him at college. We're not going to do those things, and he doesn't want to at all.
Right.
And same with like getting engaged and stuff. It was kind of like, I don't know, maybe because I'm a girl and I love weddings, but I don't know, but the thought of him not doing that, it was hard.
Yeah.
And seeing the excitement in like my sister, you know, that her son's getting engaged and planning that, and our friends' kids and doing the surprise engagement parties and things like that. And it's just like, ouch. I mean, it's just like, ouch. And even though, like you said, Cason doesn't understand all that, like he doesn't understand it, but he doesn't care to drive. He doesn't care to go to college. He doesn't want to talk to girls. He
is perfectly happy, and good for him. You know what I mean? And I'm glad, but he's all he ever you know, I mean, and he's blossomed a lot in the 5 years that he's been at the day program, but he will, I mean, if you asked him now, like what he wants to do, his dreams are very grounded, you know,
except for wanting to be in the NBA.
well,
Play.
right. Other than that, but that just makes him like a child.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
because he is a child.
He's a
and
child, and he doesn't have these big expectations or big goals for himself because he thinks like a 7-year-old.
Right. And because we have friends that they're special needs adults, kids, you know, they want to drive. They want the college experience. They want to live on their own.
Right.
They know that their parents have guardianship over them. And they're like, really? You know, so we're kind of blessed, I would say, like you said, in that regard, that he doesn't question us and all that. He's very comfortable at home. He has his routine. And he's completely fine with that.
Given the circumstances, those are some big benefits.
Right. Yeah. So what milestone for you do you think was
the hardest so far?
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the other aspects of dealing with grief in a marriage when you have a special family is the milestones, especially early on. They're not as shared as they are when you get a little older. You know,
shared between you and me.
Well, how they feel.
Oh.
You know, when I would say that, like most dads, you know, we feel our job starts more around the time that they're kind of getting into school, and we're going to start taking them to school and coaching their sports teams and stuff like that. That's when we really, really step in, right? And so, you know, and I love sports. I played sports. I think sports are very important to the growth of a child, boys for sure. So not getting to do that was an expectation I had that you know, even up until we were told that that we should institutionalize him, he was 6. So he was a year or 2 behind, but I still thought he was, you know, he'd still get his chance. And after that happened, and especially once we were told that, and changed everything, but also, you know, he was having motor skills issues, and it was just very clear that was just not something that was going to be in his future. Luckily, I'll talk about how that ended up being a surprise a little later.
Yeah, but you found it harder to see your friends going out and coaching their son's team and being there on a Saturday morning watching him play soccer and stuff, and you're at home having to wrestle him just to put on clothes, and
we're watching, you know,
Thomas
the Tank Engine for the 500th time,
and he's peeing in the couch.
Yeah, I mean, it was just not what I expected. But the point is that I think in a marriage, early in the formative years of the first, let's call it 5-6 years, I think that the milestones that a mom gets excited about versus what a dad gets excited about are they're a little different, right? It's not that we don't share the joy. It's just, you know, we just don't get as excited about some things. You know, he's having his first haircut. I don't know that a lot of guys care about that, but you know, they save hair and, you know, those types of things. Because getting a haircut was a tough thing for Cason.
We didn't do
professional, right? I mean, we so just those things. You know.
Well, yeah, and that makes sense too, though, because we were talking how different from girls' perspective from a guy's perspective when they're young like that. It doesn't matter who the caretaker is. I mean, it could be the husband who's the sole caretaker, but most of the time, from my experience, if mom works or doesn't work, preschool parties, birthday parties, those things when they're little, the moms go to.
Right.
And the husband is say he's at work and he doesn't take the time to go to the school party. So or the preschool parties or the birthday party at the park or whatever. So he's not seeing early on,
Right.
maybe what the mom is seeing. Like you go to one of these birthday parties and you might not be aware of really how bad your child might be with other kids or something. And you go and you see that he's standing in the corner and everybody else is playing the game or whatever. Or he's throwing a fit over the fact that it's windy and he doesn't want to stand outside, or there's a bug, or his shoe's too tight, or he doesn't like the color that the cake is. And, he wants red frosting, not white frosting. And everybody else's kids seem fine with it, but you're not. And so you're kind of like, eh. So then I would have to come home and tell you, okay, there's something not right or whatever. And so when they're young, it is kind of different. But I think you're right that for a man, that really kind of starts to show around if the child's a boy, put it that way.
I would think even if it's a girl, because
That's true. Girls play little.
sure, but like you said, if the moms are going to the preschool parties, if a parent is going, but when weekends come, that tends to be when dad kicks in, right? He's taking them to the games or he's doing all that stuff, and
Teaching them to ride a bike,
yeah,
stuff like that.
Oh my gosh. Someday we'll have to talk about teaching Cason to ride a bike, which never happened. But boy, it was, the few attempts at it were rough. So again, even those things that you do get you are going to get a chance to do, they're a disaster. So it's one thing to not have a memory of your son getting engaged or graduating or playing on the high school football team or something like that. It's another thing to have a memory of trying to teach your son to ride a bike and just thinking about what a horrible experience it was. So it's just this constant reopening of the wound, and you just never really stop grieving. I'm not going to say it gets easier. It gets more tolerable, because you come to realize that it's just part of the experience. The first ones are the hardest because they're the newest. You just don't think that it's going to last forever. But the reality is when they start to pile up on each other, and they do once they start to get older.
Yeah, it seems like once they become a teenager, it seems like it's boom, 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 boom of slap in the face, slap in the face, slap in the face, and quickly having to be prepared for it, deal with it, and stuff like that. And that kind of leads us into, so how have you and I in our marriage, how have we handled that grief?
Yeah, and I think that's the crux of what we're here to talk about, because grief is a big part of a special needs marriage, and I think it's a significant reason why they don't work. I learning how to deal with it in a constructive way is a very valuable defense mechanism that is, I think, critical to success. I think one of the ways that we went through it early on, and like I said, I think initially those first few years were harder because we didn't quite have the same, we weren't on the same wavelength, because things that bothered you didn't necessarily bother me, and things that bothered me didn't necessarily bother you, just because of expectations or whatever it was.
And I think the fast pace of things happening, it was such early on, for years, but early on, he was so fast paced. I mean, it wasn't like he was a quiet kid and, just whatever. I mean, it was full court press with him constantly, up all night, hitting, yelling. I mean, it was just, we didn't have time really and truly to sit down and, hey, Jeff, let's discuss how you're feeling. We were in absolute survival mode.
We were doing what probably everyone does when they have kids at all, right? And that's that you'd talk about how tired you were, or you'd talk about how you need a break, you need me to take over. Look, common things that young parents with young kids deal with. So we were going through something that we wanted. I think at the time we certainly believed that we were just experiencing a higher level
A
of
higher level of,
normalcy,
yeah,
right?
that's a good way to put it.
But again, we were under the impression that we were going to settle into something normal.
Right, right.
So we weren't
Early
in
on.
grief yet,
Yep.
right? Now, after we were told we should institutionalize, and it all changed.
Yeah.
And that reality hit us hard, and I think from then on, as those milestones happened, it hit us harder each time. And I think one of the things we realized early on was that, as with all grief, you have to be understanding and permitting of that grief to occur. It was
Individually, too.
well,
and recognize that you are grieving at that moment, and I might not be.
That's what I was going to
Vice
say.
versa.
When it would hit one of us, and it a lot of times it would either build up, or sometimes it would just hit us, right? And it could be something as simple as some post we saw on Facebook, and it could be something as real as something we literally experienced, like trying to teach them to ride the bike. The reality is that you have to understand that the grief's okay, that you have every right to express that, and that your mate also has the right to express it too. And if you don't necessarily feel that strongly about it, or that's not the right way to put it, if it's not hitting you as hard as it's hitting them at that moment, sometimes you just got to sit back and let them vent.
Yeah, because I think we talked a lot about that. We had to get really good at communicating our needs, because sadness for me sometimes comes out as anger at first. Like, I'm angry at the situation, but really I'm not angry. I'm really, really sad.
Mad at the situation.
I'm mad at the situation, but I'm really sad. I'm heartbroken.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a mom. That's what I wanted to do. That's all I wanted to do. And when I'm in a situation where I'm not doing that, or I see on social media, she's doing it, and that's all with ease, and look at what they're doing, and they're enjoying life, and I'm not, I'll get angry, but it's really sadness. Okay. And you've had to become, I guess, more aware of that. So you'd say, I think you're angry, but I really think, you're sad. Let's talk about that. And so we've been really good about communicating our needs and allowing each other to vent, because we can get on long tirades of and crying fits. And
that's the other thing. I think you have to cry.
You have to cry.
I know not all guys are criers, but I also think that in a situation like we're in, I think we all have a breaking point, where you just can't, you just don't know what else to do. And that's just it's a cathartic release of emotion, mm-hmm. To let that out.
Right. And we allow ourselves to have pity parties.
Pity parties are a part of our marriage.
It is, where we can literally, we start off venting, then we might cry some, but then we just really get into the pity party of, this is not fair. This is not what we signed up for. We didn't ask for this. This isn't fair for Cason. This isn't fair for Jackson. This isn't, and we can get on and on and on about it. And then we stop, and then we say, okay, but.
It's almost like we need the excuse to remind each other that, this isn't fair. Mm-hmm. And it's still not fair, by the way. It's still not fair. Mm-hmm. And you need that. And the reason I think you need that in the marriage is because it's very similar to what we talked about last week. Same situation. You really just have each other to lean on, ultimately. And I know that's true for everybody, but it's not true. It's not as true anywhere as much as it is in a special needs marriage.
And who better to understand what you're going through than your spouse?
Than the only other person.
Than the only
going
person.
through it.
And it's different, like we've said before. My role in the marriage has been caretaker, stay-at-home mom with Cason. Your role has been to provide for us. So our roles have been different, but that doesn't mean, and it doesn't lessen your sadness, frustration, or mine, because it's not it. So we have to come together, and I can vent to you about such and such with Cason, and then you can vent to me about such and such with Cason, and what's bothering you, and what's bothering me, but then we kind of, when the pity party's wrapping up, we both say, okay, we have to put on your big boy undies, and I have to put on my big girl panties, and be like, okay, and
maybe I'll just put on the big girl panties.
Yeah, maybe
right?
so. Yeah, and then we literally have to say, okay, but we don't have a choice. Tomorrow's a new day. We have to still caretake. It's feeling sorry for ourselves and being sad or frustrated or whatever doesn't change the fact that we have a 23-year-old son that the next day I have to go to a doctor's appointment at 8 a.m.
Yeah.
And then the next day you're going to go take him to get labs done because I have Bible study to go to or whatever. So our job doesn't end.
But you feel it's short-lived, but you do feel better.
You do feel better.
It feels better I think, even though I've never experienced anything when I've had those discussions with you and felt like you didn't understand what I was saying. The reality is there's just something nice to be able to talk about something to someone who understands what you're going through and have them tell you that your feelings are justifiable.
Right. And that kind of reminds me of Cason psychiatrists years ago had said, maybe you guys should go see a therapist, and just so you can vent to her about being a special needs parent.
We went once.
And we left saying that was the biggest waste of money.
Well, I mean, we paid $150 to do what we can do for free. And we're better at it.
Right. And no fault of hers. I mean, she's a great therapist and everything, but the thing she was suggesting for us to do, go have respite. Go leave Cason for a weekend. You two need to get away. And we're looking at her going, how's that going to happen? Tell me how. Who's going to come stay with him when he's destroying the house and he's violent? Tell me who.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's easy for a therapist who has perfectly normal, healthy children to say, you guys need to go out. You need to get away. You need a break. You need to nourish your marriage. And we're sitting there getting pissed off, really, because we're like, you have no idea.
I think something else that's helpful to me, you mentioned last week that humor has played a part in our marriage. One of the things that I end up, as I go through my stages when I'm having a pity party, when I reach the stage that I call satire is when I start being highly exaggerative and sarcastic about how ridiculous our situation is. And we eventually end up laughing about it because we know it's kind of true, but it also, it kind of builds you back up. Because it all feels too heavy almost all the time. But at the conclusion of getting a chance to really let it out, it's almost like you get to look back and say, well, I survived another day. I'm pretty amazing that I was able to do that.
Right.
And God, you need it. You need that.
And I do want to touch on the fact that you and I are both on antidepressants.
Oh yeah. And I will say for people out there, because I can relate. You've been on an antidepressant longer than I have. Because you had a chemical imbalance that required it.
Prior to Cason, prior to
I never needed an antidepressant until Not even, and it wasn't even when they told us we should institutionalize him. It was
It's probably like
probably
10 years. Maybe
yeah,
10
maybe
years.
10 years ago. About the time Cason got to be about 10, maybe. I remember I was just like, my positive attitude has taken me about as far as it can. And
Same with your humor. When your humor was really
dark.
dark,
It was dark.
and yeah, I mean, and just, I think we both, yes, and I've been on antidepressant for a long time, but I've had to go up significantly on it. And I'm not ashamed of that, because I think you and I are under an extreme amount of pressure from multiple different things. And the emotional aspect of Cason, the grief, the ongoing grief, the new grief that comes on, has significantly helped us. And I think it's helped our marriage too, because if one of us was not on an antidepressant, I don't think that person would be able to see the glimmer of hope out there, because you get that when you're in that mental state of just, I'm doing the same thing every single day, and I have been for 23 years, and it's not going to change. How do you wrap your head around that? And same with you. I work hard. I have to support this kid for my entire life. Am I going to be able to retire? Are you and I going to ever be empty nesters?
Don't make me start making jokes.
I know. But those are thoughts. And you and I have talked about that. Like, talking about a thing of grief, part of parenting is being able to kind of say there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Yeah. And so many of our friends are about at that point where they're empty nesters and they're starting to think of retirement and they're planning on traveling and doing these things. And you and I get to, just like we have for the past 23 years, over every milestone, everything, you and I get to sit back and say, not us.
No, I'll tell you what, I mean, I had a little moment. We've been watching The Americas with Tom Hanks. And I can't remember which episode it was, but there was some owls. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about how it was time for the chicks to leave the nest. Yeah. And Mama wouldn't have any of it. She was like, you got to get out. And this is just the way it is. And I thought, God, I'm glad I'm not an owl. Or I guess there aren't special needs owls because, right. We're not in that situation. Mm-hmm. So,
and I know every special needs parent that has an adult special needs child who are older, getting to retirement age and whatever, but you're still so responsible for that child / adult, knows what we're talking about here. Yeah. And that in itself is a whole nother level of grief and a milestone that, we're not going to necessarily get there. Yeah. And to constantly know he will always be our responsibility. Everything about him is our responsibility.
Well, before we lose track of it, the one thing I did want to say about antidepressants is if you're one of those people out there who feels that taking an antidepressant is a sign of weakness or instability, and you're in our situation, my best advice to you is get over it, because man, just taking the edge off helps a lot. Helps a whole lot.
That helps a whole lot. And so part of how we've been successful in being married for 30 years, and 23 of those years we've had a special needs child, is we talked about that we've been able to share feelings. Mm-hmm.
And I know that sounds all touchy-feely and 70s. Yeah. The reality is that, for normal marriages, this may sound a little new age, but for marriages in our case, you just can't underestimate it. I'm not saying you got to sit down and there's a formal way you got to. So tell me how you're feeling.
Right.
It's not like that.
No.
It's much more instantaneous than that.
Yeah, and especially when you're having those moments, those
Mhm.
grief moments, those sadness moments, those pity party moments, those I feel bad for our situation moments. You and I have been so good about coming together and talking about it and venting and crying and having the pity parties and stuff. And because we've done that, we have been able to find moments and see beauty over the last 23 years that we would have never been able to see
Mm-hmm.
if we were stuck in that sad pity party mode. Because,
Give an example of that.
well, we, living in the special needs world, we have met some of the most amazing families and people, special needs, other special needs kids, adults, that it's a world we would have never been a part of. And it's a beautiful world. The innocence of these kids,
Kindness,
the kindness,
the acceptance.
yes. Same goes for these families, these parents. The lack of judgment, just the kindness from these other parents, the understanding, the empathy, because they know what you're walking through. They know, might not be the exact same journey, but they have their own journey. And it is a beautiful place to be. When that's why we say we love like going to My Possibilities events and stuff, because you're surrounded by people who were chosen to be parents of special needs kids. And it's also made us ourselves way more empathetic and understanding of everybody, not even special needs, just people that are less fortunate than us, that are having a hard time or whatever. It's just really opened our eyes to there's more to this life than what you see on Facebook. And, there's a beauty of differences and uniqueness. And we had said if we weren't able to share the feelings, which wouldn't allow us to see the beauty of the hardness of our situation, then we wouldn't be able to be accepting of our reality.
Yeah, and I think that's if there's something I could tell someone out there who's in our situation and their kids are younger, they're in that 10-year-old, they're going through the phases. One of the things that I would say, even though the milestones get heavier because they feel more important to life, the reality is if you allow yourself to grieve, even if it's an ongoing grieving process, it does soften your heart. And I'm not saying it gets easier to grieve those things, but it does get different. Because you do expect to grieve. At the beginning, you don't. You fight it. As you grow older and wiser, you know that it's part of the deal. But it also opens your eyes to, because I mean, a specific example, looking at Facebook used to set me off. Now I just kind of, it bothers me, but it doesn't bother me like it used to. But I can tell you that the first time I witnessed they're adults at My Possibilities, Cason wasn't even going there yet. I was just, I was on the board and I was at an event and I saw some of them, and there was a kid who was having a hard day, and he had an accident, and it was like right in front of everybody, and nobody really acknowledged it. And I'm not going to say that there's a good chance they didn't know any better, but one of them did. And he said, it's okay. Come on, I'll help you out. I'll help you. And they left. And I just thought, that's just not something you're going to see normal people do.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so sweet.
And we hear that. I mean, Cason talks about stuff like that all the time, where he was like, so-and-so was having a really hard day today. And so I went and asked if they needed a hug. And it's stuff like that that in the traditional world, the civilian world, you don't see that. Look at the hate. Look at the people arguing all the time, kids bullying and all that stuff. You don't see that.
Yeah, that doesn't exist there.
It doesn't exist in that whole population, not just at My Possibilities, but that is the innocence of people with special needs.
And I think when you get down to it, one of the biggest things you have to reconcile with whether you can stay married or not, if you're going to be a primary caregiver or even a secondary caregiver, if you're going to be able to manage your marriage or not, one thing you have to accept is your reality. And you have to find a way to look at that reality as not being essentially the end of the world and you're just fighting through life for the next 50 years. There is a brighter side to this. There is a side that there are those moments that make it worth it. You know, you got to find them though. And once you start looking for them, they find you. And that's why it's if you don't share those feelings, like any other feeling in any other marriage, they're going to build up. Someone's going to blow up. Someone's going to blame somebody for something, and you're going to fracture a marriage. If you don't allow those feelings to be shared, well, more importantly, if you don't allow those feelings to come out, you're going to find it very hard to survive this. And more to the point, whether your marriage makes it or not, finding those moments where you observe those special things that occur in your life because of your kids, because of who your kids are with, or the programs they're in, you know, you'll miss it. I mean, going back to the coaching thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Cason was, he had he liked watching sports, but he was not interested in playing sports. Pretty much, he was agitated by bugs. He was agitated by noises. It was too hot.
He didn't like
too
the
cold.
uniforms. He didn't want to.
People were too big. He didn't want to be. He was scared of them. If they were too small, that scared him. I mean, he had a million reasons why he couldn't play sports, and so we kind of gave up on it. And it wasn't until we got to My Possibilities, probably by the time he was getting back from COVID. So this is probably 2021, 2022, somewhere in there. He started playing on the Special Olympics team, where he was able to, and then we have a soccer league. So he plays soccer and he plays basketball, and now he's really into it. And so when he came home and told me he was excited about playing basketball, which is my favorite sport to play, my favorite sport to play when I was younger, I was like, oh, this is exciting. You know, I'm going to get to watch my son play basketball. Now, if this had been 15 years ago, I probably would have had a different set of expectations. But going into this, I was just excited about the possibility of seeing my son play a sport.
Mm-hmm. In fact, about that time is when he wanted Santa to bring him a basketball goal.
Yeah, he wanted Santa to bring him a basketball goal. So, you know, his first practice was coming up, and he'd been out on the basketball. You know, he'd go out there a little bit to shoot around, but he would generally come in pretty quick because he'd get too hot or whatever. And there was one day where he just said, "Hey, Dad, can you show me? I've heard someone talk about something in basketball called a pass. Can you show me how to do that?" And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get a chance to coach my kid. You know, we got to go outside and I explained the difference between a bounce pass and a chest pass. And it was, it fulfilled, that moment was the fulfillment of something I had dreamed about for a long time. And, you know, now I get to kind of help participate in coaching the team when they play, and all those kids have questions where they're asking about, what do they do with the ball? It's totally different.
It's different, yeah.
But it's still, because I have accepted my reality, it's still very special and fulfilling for me to get the chance to do that, which is why again, to reiterate what the formula is, share your feelings, get your feelings out so that you get a chance to see the things happening around you that you're missing because you're so mad.
The beauty.
See the beauty around you so that you can accept the situation that you're in and make the best of it.
And to know and to understand that that's a cycle. It's not a one and done.
Yeah,
it's
a cycle. This is a cycle that repeats itself over
constantly.
and over.
And sometimes for us, it really kind of depends on what's going on with Cason.
Well, of course it does.
Yeah, and that affects this when things are not going well with him and super stressful, and we have a lot piled up. We go back through this. We go through the process, the vent, the crying. Let's have a big pity party right now. Let's laugh about it. Let's put on our big girl, big boy panties and go and start the whole thing over and acknowledge that it's not a one and done. This is going to happen again, and it's going to happen again, and it might happen tomorrow. It might happen a week from the last time it happened, and that's okay. And that it's okay to be sad. It's okay to grieve, but it's also okay to find the joy in the beauty of the life we have. And I'm going to end it on rereading
just revisiting
the end of her Emily Kingsley's poem, because it just sums up what we just talked about. And the pain of that will never, ever, ever go away, because the loss of that dream is a very, very significant loss. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to go to Italy, or as we said, move to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things about Holland. And that is exactly true.
Or my interpretation, Poughkeepsie. Right.
Yes.
So that's this week's episode. We hope you'll come back next week. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Kim.
And this is Specialness. Thanks a lot.